All right, welcome to the Dealan-de podcast. I am Adam Dealan-de, your host, and I have a guest with me, Andre Stackhouse, who was a software engineer, I'd say, and then you turned into kind of a political activist. Started out working with the Bernie Sanders campaign, eventually became the campaign director, is that right, of a whole Washington, and you also helped found another organization, Medicare for All Everywhere. And we were going to have a discussion about universal health care, current situation nationally and statewide. And I thought I'd just open up with you, just tell me a little bit about your journey to this.
Well, you did a pretty good job there breaking it down. Only detail I might try to quibble with a little bit is I do sometimes consider myself still a software developer. I pick up the odd contract now and then, and oftentimes one of the ways I'm contributing to the groups that I'm working with is with sort of tech help. And one reason I say this is just to all of the software developers out there who think, well, I'm interested, but politics isn't really my game. How could I contribute anyway? Being able to apply tech skills to solve problems will make you a superhero in the world of activism. It is it is in such high demand. So I do really implore you all, whatever your skills are, tech or otherwise, become a practitioner, get your hands dirty, use your skills, and I promise you they are very useful in this space.
Thanks. Yeah, I've known a few software developers, and it's not the easiest thing, but it can be lucrative and but also can be really challenging to get your foot in the door. So I want to kind of jump in. What's the state of affairs right now? Where do we stand with universal health care, either nationally or statewide?
Well, I usually try to focus on the good. So, in the last election, I would say major developments were South Dakota became the latest state to expand to Medicaid. They did that on the ballot, so proving that, this is a mobilizing issue to organize around, and that it can win on the ballot, even in a rural red state. That's Medicaid expansion, so it's only a very important but very preliminary step towards universal health care, even within one state. Federally, I'd say we've basically held even. The Democrats lost the House, so it's hard to say that doesn't set back federal Medicare for all. On the other hand, I think the number of co-sponsoring legislators in the House and Senate is probably close to the same as where it's been. It might have fluctuated a little bit. I'd actually really appreciate it if anyone could get me hard data on that. Did the co-sponsorship change at all with the new Congress? But it's more or less, equally likely to pass with this Congress as the last one, which is to say it's not going to even come up for a vote. Statewide, we just finished the campaign to get universal health care on the ballot in Washington. So that was a statewide ballot initiative campaign. We wrapped it up at the end of December. And we were able to deliver about 90,000 signatures to Olympia, which was short of the about 325,000 that you need to get on the ballot. So we delivered them, to practice, to get a good photo, to make a point. And so, 90,000 signatures is not easy to collect, especially not in the current times with COVID and a number of other things making organizing really difficult right now. But we just sent out a volunteer survey asking folks, a number of questions. But one of them was, do you think that the campaign we ran brought us closer to universal health care? And are you glad we ran the campaign? And overwhelmingly, the results of both of those questions was very strong agreement, that it did bring us closer. And that's through a number of ways, public outreach, endorsements, policy development, coalition building. But I think folks feel that their time was well used and that it was contributing to the cause and advancing it. The major developments right now are that we have introduced a legislative version into the Senate So Senate Bill 5335. So you can leave a public comment on that right now. You can ask for it to get a hearing. Realistically, it will be very challenging to get this through the Senate this year. But we still believe in building support in the legislature for this. We also believe, that we are likely to be able to get this introduced into the House this year, which is an accomplishment for us. We haven't been able to get it introduced into the House before. So that's another area where we can see some progress. And then there's a Universal Healthcare Commission in Washington, right? And so that's sort of where a lot of the legislative energy has gone. When you ask them, what's your position on healthcare, they'll say, well, we support universal healthcare. We support the work of the Universal Healthcare Commission, which, in theory is going to recommend a universal healthcare system at some point in the future and recommend it to the legislature, who, if they take that recommendation, would implement it and then would, bring universal healthcare to Washington. So, I sort of think of there's like three paths in Washington. There's the voters put it on the ballot themselves. Actually, I'll just back to the survey, because this was another one of the survey questions. So I asked on the survey, what do you think is the most likely way universal healthcare happens? Like the fastest and the first. So one of the answers was like, it happens federally first, right? The other one is voters put it on the ballot and then it passes. The other one is the legislature puts it on the ballot and then it passes. The other one is the legislature just sort of passes it as a bill. And then the last one was the Universal Healthcare Commission recommends it to the legislature and then they pass it. So sort of 5 options. But by far the most popular response was that voters are going to put this on the ballot and it passes. But the next most likely response was people who believe that ultimately the Universal Healthcare Commission will recommend a system that the legislature implements. So people aren't completely, lacking in faith that the commission might follow through on this. We happen to believe that the best way that we can convince the commission to recommend a universal healthcare system like the one that we want is to gather signatures and use those signatures to pressure the commission to look at our bill and to recommend that the legislature pass it. So, fingers crossed, I actually think we're going to be able to get the commission to look at our bill this year. And that might give us a much better sense of where to set our expectations in terms of how much support it can get out there. But long story short, there have definitely been setbacks and the road ahead has a lot of obstacles, but I think we see a lot of progress and we see a lot of paths forward and a lot of hope for the future. And I think that 2022 at the end of the day was a year of progress for both Washington and the Medicare for All movement. And I think that we can expect more progress in 2023.
And then with that, some people might say, well, hey, I've got Apple Care or I've got healthcare through my employment. Why is this even something I need? Is there anybody that's really uninsured, or, what would you be your answer to that? Of, why this universal healthcare, and especially statewide?
Yeah, well, let me put it this way. As a guy who worked at Microsoft, who had sort of like Cadillac health insurance plan, right? And then as a guy who's now on Apple Health, which turns out actually in Washington is a pretty good insurance plan. There are some limitations to it. There aren't that many providers, for instance, who will take Apple Health for adult dental care. But I'm able to get most of my care through the UW medical system, which is really good. It's actually where I've always got my care, even before I had Apple Health. But anyway, long story short, there are very good reasons to want universal healthcare, despite the fact that, ultimately, I think there's about 5 to 6.5% of Washington state is completely uninsured. You have many times more who are underinsured, right? So underinsured means you have some form of health insurance, but when you actually need it, it turns out that its coverage is not nearly as generous as you need it to be. And so you're paying very high out-of-pocket costs that you can't necessarily afford. And so the thing is, I think that if you look at the trends of the healthcare system in the United States, you see costs spiraling out of control. You see sort of very concerning health trends in terms of life expectancy. You see us failing to sort of keep up with the rest of the world in terms of keeping costs under control, but also just in terms of our overall health. And so the reality is that most people, almost nobody in the United States, can claim to be truly healthcare secure. There was a story that really moved me a long time ago about a Nobel Prize winner who in his final years was actually selling his Nobel Prize online because he couldn't afford his healthcare costs. And, I remember thinking, like, I'm pretty proud of what I've accomplished in my life, but I haven't won any Nobel Prizes, and I'm probably not going to. And it doesn't, we like to sometimes believe that we live in this sort of meritocracy, right? If you're participating and you're cooperating with the system, right, you ought to be taken care of. But you see this very clear example of somebody who has almost the ultimate sign of merit, and yet the system leaves them completely at the mercy of a predatory private healthcare system that is leeching this man's greatest accomplishment in his final years, right? That should terrify all of us, right? This system is in a downward spiral, and it is coming for all of us. But in more simple terms, right, you might have healthcare right now, but I can't remember the exact figure, but I mean, millions of people lost their healthcare when COVID hit because their healthcare was tied to their employer, right? And so when their employer could no longer employ them, they lost their healthcare. In some cases, it might be directly related to the fact that you got sick. So you got sick, you couldn't work anymore, you lose your insurance, and now you can't afford the healthcare that would have helped you get better, right? So people, you might have healthcare right now, you might have healthcare when you're young, or you might not have, a lot of healthcare costs, right? But over the course of your lifetime, you are very healthcare insecure because our system leaves us all that way. And so it takes a reframing, I think that Americans might not be used to because we're so trained to think in market logic, which is to say that, our ability to access healthcare and the healthcare system depends on the market, right? So where are you in the market? What is the market like right now? That's normal to us, right? But in other systems, and in other parts of the United States system, right? So it's not that difficult to imagine. So it's something like the fire department, right? They come and they put out your house from burning down, right? They don't hand you a bill at the end. And it's not because it's a charity, and it's not because all of those nice firefighters work for free. It's just that, it's already paid for because we've organized our society in such a way that says we are going to find a way to pay for this public good, outside of the market and outside of consumer spending. And so all we really call for is for our healthcare system to be added to that list of things that is treated as a public good and a guarantee. And so, in addition to making healthcare far cheaper, right? And there's a number of ways it does that, but it actually reduces the cost of healthcare because it makes the system so much more efficient. I'll just give a couple examples, right? Preventative care is one of the best examples. So when people can't afford to see a doctor regularly, they forego medical care. So medical needs that they have are not detected early, and they don't go in for treatment until that gets much, much worse. Now the cost of care is many times higher than had it been detected and treated early, right? So by offering a guarantee of healthcare, you can actually reduce the cost of healthcare for that person. There's other ways in which it reduces costs. One is just efficiency. So by having a million different private health insurance plans, all of which work differently, all of which are cutting costs, right? So much more time is spent on billing and administration, whereas when there's not really any questions to ask, it's yes, of course, it's covered, and here's your reimbursement. The entire system just flows faster, and you don't waste nearly as much money on administration. And then there's all of these other ways in which it has these sort of knock-on effects, right? So health insurance or healthcare, medical expenses are the number one cause of bankruptcy, right? Which means that it has a huge impact on homelessness, right? Homelessness, so things like just, mental health, homelessness, crime, a lot of these sort of, I don't know, there are a lot of things downstream of healthcare where a good healthcare system and strong public health system basically improves people's lives across the board, and then that has a sort of multiplicative effect across a number of other sectors. So, it will both make it'll help us solve a number of societal issues, while at the same time for any one of us making our lives simpler, less time on the phone with your insurance company, less time looking at bills. It'll be cheaper for us overall, so we'll have more money in our pocket at the end of the year. And it'll just give us a completely different relationship with our healthcare system. It won't be a matter of, thinking, how much healthcare can I get away with this year, right? What can I skip? What's important? And instead it will be, what do I think is important for my own health? What does my doctor think, right? And then you can make those decisions in that sort of more informed way rather than one based on the economic pressures that can be put on you.
I guess, like say someone's like, well, hey, great, I could go into emergency whenever I want, when I need to, and I'm not going to have to think about a bill. I can go into my doctor's office, get an appointment. I'm not going to have to think about a bill. I just go in and get care, or a dentist office, or preventative care. But if I'm able to do all those things, isn't it going to be super expensive on all of us? Like, man, this is going to cost a ton of money for if we can all just get any kind of, get the care we want whenever we want it. And B, then also, then how does countries like Nicaragua or Cuba, how do they afford it? Do they basically control us? So, so are we A, going to be controlled, and B, is it just going to cost a ton of money?
So there's a lot there, I suppose, but but I think that to the first part, is this going to cost a lot of money? I mean, you have to look at the cost of our current system as your point of comparison, right? So our current system costs about twice as much in total healthcare spending as any peer nation of the United States. So, the OECD is kind of the traditional metric of that, but an industrialized country, post-industrial countries with universal healthcare systems, all are paying less per capita, and yet they're living longer, healthier lives. So that shows you that it doesn't necessarily cost more. And I already outlined a number of ways in which it can be cost saving. It can be counterintuitive, but there are many ways in which it saves costs. But the other thing is just that so many of the costs in our current system are hidden, and that's the way that it can seem like it costs less, right? So when you think about, well, Joe Schmo would have gone to the doctor 10 times if he could have gone as much as he wanted, right? Well, if our current system means that he goes one time, but it's to the emergency room and he can't pay for it, right? That creates a situation where, one, he's bankrupt now. Two, the hospital just took a big loss on his care because they actually are legally required to provide care to emergency room patients, right? So we already have this system where, healthcare for emergency room visits is subsidized. How do they subsidize it? Well, it's in all of the costs that get inflated in the form of, you know, uh, high hospital fees, and all of this stuff that um, basically, that cost gets passed on to the rest of the system, right? And so it raises the price of the hospital fees, which then raises the price of the insurance premiums. And so, this cost is incredibly high. The cost of having people unhealthy and unable to get care, right? What's another way that this has a huge cost? People who are unable to work, right? So people where if they were able to receive care in an ongoing way, especially if they were able to receive care early when it could have made the biggest difference, right? Might have been able to just be perfectly able to go back to work in whatever it is, a month, a year. But the point is, the alternate case can often be that instead this person, becomes effectively disabled for life, right? And now they're on assistance programs. They're, being taken care of by friends or family if they're lucky. In other cases, they don't have that kind of support. They could end up homeless, right? This can end in a number of different ways, but all of them are incredibly expensive. So the point is that, generally speaking, it is not an actual problem that people bankrupt healthcare systems by seeking way too much care. People looking after their health overall is a good thing. That does not mean there is never a single situation in which, some amount of care is excessive, some amount of patient anxiety is unnecessary, whatever, right? But the point is, it is not a bad thing to give people as much access as they need to the healthcare system. And the reality is that, yes, there are always ways in which there are limitations on the system, and then there have to be those limitations are managed in some way, right? So right now, again, you always have to compare to the current system. Right now, the way that is often managed is, if you can't afford care, you don't get care, right? Um, Oftentimes people will make noise about wait times in other countries, right? Like Canada or the UK or whatever, right? But they are not considering all of the people who are waiting to be able to afford the care that they need to be as part of the wait time, right? The point is that, the way I think of the US system is, it's sort of like, if you imagine everyone who needs healthcare in line, you say, okay, first of all, everybody who can't afford to get the healthcare they need, get out of the line. Now, everyone who can afford to pay extra to get your care faster, move to the front of the line, right? That is not more fair than, a system that takes longer to get to some people because everybody is getting care. It's easy to just say, well, to solve this capacity problem, we're just going to not give care to people. If you say that that's unacceptable, then you say, well, we have to include those people in the conversation. So you asked about Cuba, and I think there's a number of countries that provide very good examples of how cost-effective healthcare can be. Cuba, Taiwan, and frankly, a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, Singapore might be one, are examples of countries that have very cost-effective healthcare systems. Taiwan is a single-payer system, which is like what we propose with whole Washington. It's also what Medicare for All is designed as, a single payer. Canadian system is single payer. Cuba is based more after a UK model, which is known as a beverage model, not like the drink Beveridge, named after William Beveridge. And that's sort of a top to bottom public system. So the hospitals are public hospitals, the doctors are public employees. These systems in the UK, I know that, a fairly high percentage of UK residents pay supplemental private insurance to get things like nicer hospital beds and to get to have shorter wait times and stuff. And so it's not 100% public. Cuba is probably closer to a fully public system. Cuba is a really unique healthcare system in that it is one of the most cost effective in terms of the amount of money spent per person, and yet they have very healthy lives, generally speaking, as a population, and they produce a massive surplus in doctors, so much so that they're able to actually basically go on international healthcare missions all around the world. So, Cuba is basically an example of a more top-down system in which, the government has chosen to highly prioritize healthcare in their education system, and in their public infrastructure, to make sure that there's a lot of doctors and a lot of clinics, and that people are able to get care very quickly and very cheaply. And so it's not necessarily the case that they have some, amazing technology that makes it cheaper, or, any particular secrets. In some ways, it's a much simpler system, that is maybe a little bit more holistic in terms of lifestyle, and just sort of like really easy access to things that make people healthy. But all that is to say that universal healthcare can be achieved in a number of different ways. We think single payer is an excellent model for the United States and for sort of the political landscape that we exist in. But we often have to face the criticism that universal healthcare is like somehow impossible, right? You could never do it. It would never work in the United States. It would never work at state level, whatever. And the point is, this has been achieved in many different ways across many different countries across the world. And so the first thing that we have to concede is that it is 100% achievable. Once we kind of accept that, right, we can get into the details of how it works. And I think that, the plans that we propose hold up really well in that light. But I think that, for a lot of people, we still need to do that convincing that, like, first, let's establish that this can 100% be done.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like the math is there. It's if you just look at the math of it, where we, collect our money and then how we pool it together and pay for it. We do it with the schools, we do it with police departments, we do it with fire departments. This is just another area that we could do that in, it seems like. What is there any picture or study, being that we're kind of either through COVID, or we've been through the bulk of the COVID experience pandemic. Is there any knowledge we have gained as to if we had universal health care in this country, what difference that would have made? I mean, everybody seemed to like, hey, I got my shots, but what do we know of any effect that might have had?
Yeah, I hear that the state of emergency is going to end on May 11th or something like that. So, maybe we put a nice little end date on it and we can run the numbers in the end. Obviously, realistically, I think that, the impacts of COVID are going to continue for a long time, and it will be difficult to fully understand. But what I can say is that, there was a study, and I don't remember who ran it, but it was published in Scientific American, or at least covered in Scientific American, maybe about a year ago. And at the time, the estimate was that a universal healthcare system in the United States could have saved about 330,000 lives, during the duration of COVID at that time. And, we are still in a rate of really pretty high hospitalization, and it's been a year since then, so that number only, of course, ever gets higher. I think another interesting effect of COVID was that, it created for many people what might have been a first experience with something that was like a public healthcare system, which is to say, you go to a local clinic, you get a free shot. It helps you get sick less often and less intensely, right? And then that makes other people get less sick. It makes the entire system less strained, right? So I think for a lot of people, it was an introduction to free healthcare as a concept, and I think we can build off of that and use it. And COVID in general, I think, has created a certain public awareness around how healthcare insecure people are, because so many people did lose their healthcare during the pandemic, and it was so obviously exactly when they needed it. And so, frankly, I'm incredibly disappointed that COVID has not been more effectively leveraged by the universal healthcare movement as a sort of, means of demanding immediate action on it. Even, you know, even something that could be considered more of a band-aid, but like we are going to get some healthcare out of this, um, and I think we really basically got nothing so far, and maybe it's the sort of thing that we actually need a minute to reflect and mourn how much we really lost during this. I think that we frankly haven't done that yet as a society and as a world. um you know but I sometimes, we lost millions of people, and I think that um it would actually be insane to not come out of this pandemic with some substantive public health reforms, and I can't guarantee that we're going to get them, in the next, whenever, right? Whenever that would count. But I think that I think it would be a huge lost opportunity, and I think that we really need to rally around that.
I mean, when Bernie Sanders ran the first time and the second time, I mean, it seemed Medicare for all, which isn't universal healthcare, but it's kind of, it's a paid universal system similar to a single. I mean, it is a single payer, but it it was kind of his galvanizing piece of legislation. There were other things in his platform, but that was like the central. I think that really galvanized his campaign, and it's kind of disappeared as advocate. Like he's not really advocating it out there. Joe Biden kind of was pushed in his campaign to say he'd do an option, public option, which is he's not talking about. No one's talking about. And even a lot of the squad members or progressive members uh, the Democratic Party who advocated and said they'd push for Medicare for all. Even Kamala Harris has pushed for it. They've all sort of dropped off, and even when they're pressured, was it 2 years ago to do force the vote, which was, I think it was sort of a lot of drama on that about what was the objective of, but it was kind of an objective to push the House to at least do a vote to see where everybody was at. Maybe it wouldn't have passed, but that was not done by the squad. And their thing was, well, we don't want to do that because, as far as I understand, that it would take away from the movement. But it seems like, if we look at the overall national movement, it's really disappeared. And really something like what was happening in Washington State with your organization was kind of one of the gold standards, I'd say, of a people's push, a people's movement, so to speak, to make that happen. What do you say about all that I just said? Where do you think that stands? It seems like it's really in our hands.
Well, I would say that, I was not really aware of a single payer movement before Bernie Sanders, and the reality is that there has always been one, right? There's been one for 100 years. I don't know exactly, but there have been many pushes before Bernie Sanders, but he really, the sort of Medicare for all movement as we think of it today, was very much I mean, I'm struggling for the word, but it really, was catalyzed by the Bernie Sanders movement. Um, and and I think that, like so much of Bernie Sanders 2016 movement, where so many sort of dormant political movements suddenly came together under sort of a shared banner, and all of them believed that they might achieve more than they previously thought was possible. It created this incredible energy, but the unfortunate thing was that as much as it appeared to be a movement, it wasn't really organized as a movement. It was organized as a presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders. And then it was able to sort of continue existing as a loosely held coalition that could then rally again behind Bernie Sanders' second presidential campaign. But with him unlikely to run another campaign, and it being less clear that this coalition would actually, unite again for a third Bernie Sanders campaign, I think that plays an unfortunately big role in what happened to the Medicare for All movement. Many of his disciples, if you will, people who sort of came into politics through his campaign in one way or another, were Medicare for All supporters. So, while that banner was being held and being carried, we got, new bills into the House and the Senate, and we're going to maintain that ground for now. We got sort of, I would say, probably record co-sponsors in the House and the Senate, and for the most part, we have held that ground. But you're correct in that you can see it being de-emphasized by the people who we would think of as leaders of this. And I think that is due to the fact that, there isn't necessarily it doesn't necessarily have the political capital at the moment, right? It's not the thing that's going to win people campaigns. At least, it's not perceived as the thing that's going to win people campaigns. It's not perceived as the thing that, if I don't talk about this, I'm going to be in big trouble, right? And so it seems to be that the position of a lot of the sort of progressive members of the legislature is, if we tweet about this every now and then, and we hold a town hall, and, we had hearings last year, and I think we'll probably have hearings again this year, the Medicare for All movement will be happy enough with us, and they can't expect more from us until we've got more people anyway, I think is where they are on it. I think that I think that, and to be totally honest with you, I don't think that is the craziest position for the legislature to take. Obviously, I think they should be leading on this issue. My favorite candidates in Congress are going to be the ones who are like, I would lead this issue if I was the last person in Congress to support it, right? But generally speaking, whether or not we like it, legislators lead from behind their constituents, right? So unless they're getting that pressure from their base, or their donors, we should be honest, right? They're going to be sort of the last domino to fall. I find it more disappointing when organizations, nonprofits, activist groups, see that from the Democratic Party and then say, well, we need to actually go behind them, right? And so we can't pressure them. We can't ask anything of them. We need to support what they're doing. And to me, that's sort of the losing formula is if you're the single payer movement, right? Single payer needs to be your first issue. You need to treat it as your first and primary issue, which means that, your asks of legislators need to be really clear, which is to say the ask is always that they support it. And however much they support it, could you support it a little bit more? And so I think that the sort of national Medicare for All organizations need to see themselves as being the people who are pushing, of course, new legislators, right? Flipping people, gaining seats, but also really, really working the co-sponsors of Medicare for All and asking them to do a little bit of groundwork on that. And to, co-sponsorship means leading. So I think that, the national groups need to take that position. And I'll say that, I think that whole Washington is a gold standard for sort of grassroots organizing on this issue. And that is why I created the national group Medicare for All Everywhere, which is intended to sort of, develop many of those tactics into a national group, but also do it through the formation of a national coalition. So you can imagine whole Washington as being part of that coalition, along with, say, Colorado Foundation for Universal Health Care, Maine All Care, Mass Care, Cal Care, right? So there's a lot of these different state level movements and organizations. And the idea of Medicare for All Everywhere is they're actually doing the best work, the most grassroots work, the most, I guess, they're making the demands the clearest, right?
Mhm.
And they're keeping their eyes on the demands. And the problem has been that they all work for the most part in silos, right? So that's a California movement, a Washington movement. Medicare for All Everywhere says, could we actually unite these movements into a national coalition so that that national group could support all of those state campaigns, but also those state campaigns could all push for Medicare for All together. And
That's great.
so, yeah, I believe that that's the sort of like bottom up power that we need to build in the sort of like unified state federal strategy. And I do honestly, I don't want to pick favorites, right? It's like I don't have a favorite kid. But I do sort of believe that like one of the most likely paths forward is that a state passes it first, one or two additional states join, maybe adjacent ones, right? But that basically, you know, we are going to achieve something like single payer at the state level, and then it will be implemented federally. And so I think that one of the most effective ways to make federal Medicare for all happen is to make it happen in a state. And if you join Medicare for all everywhere, you can find out what's happening in your state, but then you can also get a sense of what's going on in all of the states and kind of get a sense of like, which one do you think is the most likely? I mean, obviously, I'm the campaign director of Whole Washington, but I visited Maine last year and gathered signatures with them, and I have to say, I came away from that trip thinking Maine might be the first state because it's like 1/10 the number of signatures you need than Washington, right? Like
Mhm.
it feels so much more achievable. Whereas it's a huge, there's a mountain range, like it's hard in Washington. It feels like a huge number of signatures. So, it's every state I think is important to this, but also every state I think has a unique angle to bring where they might have an opportunity that might not exist in other states.
So what are the states that seem to have, you said Maine is one, that, and Colorado has a push, and California and Washington, are those kind of, is there other things that you're seeing
So
out there?
I would divide it up in a couple different ways, right? I mean, uh, Maine and Colorado, I think, are the strongest ballot initiative states. You could throw Washington in as well, just because they have the strongest tradition of attempting to do this on the ballot. I guess you could actually throw Oregon in as well. Oregon just sort of had a victory with Measure 111, which adds healthcare to their state constitution as a right. It is not the same as an implementation, so it's not a law and it's not implemented. So we need to see if it results in anything. But the point is, it was put on the ballot and it did pass. Um, but I think that there are a number of states that seem very determined to build initiative campaigns that can succeed. And then there are states that have been more invested in a legislative approach. So CalCare has for the last couple of sessions been a legislative push. New York Health Act, they don't have ballot measures in New York, so that's always been a legislative campaign. And I would say that, the states that I listed are probably the strongest. The other one would be Mass Care, which, Mass Care has sort of one of the longest histories with state policy, in which I believe they might have passed both on the ballot and in the legislature, but it's never been passed. Vermont had a unique situation where they're the only state to have actually fully passed it and had it signed by the governor. And it just wasn't ever implemented.
What happened
So
there? Why did they pull the governor? What happened in that situation?
yeah, that's one of those it's like a fabled story in this world, and some people will point to it as proof for why this can never work at state level. And usually what they'll tell you is, well, Vermont passed it, but then they realized they could never pay for it, and so it failed. I look at this story very differently, which is that Vermont passed it because their people wanted it, because their governor recognized that it would be a good platform to run on, because their governor wanted to do it. And so he won, and then they passed it without financing, because it's always easier to pass a bill, right? Healthcare for everybody sounds great, right? Everyone wants that. It's the moment you say, well, they're gonna be taxes, it's gonna work in this way, right? The moment you get into the details, that's when people get upset, right? So it's always easier to pass it without the details. So they passed it without the details, and now the governor's in office and he's trying to implement it, right? And so he goes, oh, I'm going to tax this, and that community goes, we don't want to be taxed for this, right? Well, I'll tax that. We don't want to be taxed, right? And so now you're several years in, you haven't implemented the system, and your next election is on the horizon, and the pressure to complete your system is there, but also the pressure for it to succeed is now huge. And so increasingly it becomes easier to actually let it die on the vine rather than actually follow through and implement it. And so that's what happened. And so, one of the lessons I took from that story was like, that's why it's incredibly important that our plan includes its financing, so that, there's not a question of whether or not it can be financed and who's going to do it, right? If it passes with all of the financing it needs specified. And then, so Washington is an example of one that has had a sort of dual approach of legislative and ballot measure. But yeah, I mean, the point is that this is an incredibly hard hill to climb. And I would say that all of the efforts that have come before have been valuable, and that our work is always built off of the past efforts. But at the same time, we need to recognize that we are trying to achieve something that has never been achieved before in the United States, right? And so, we need to learn what we can from the past without letting it, give us a sense of despair and hopelessness, and recognize that this can happen because we have we have overcome bigger challenges in our history, and so it's not easy, but it is possible, and we can learn from the past, and we can base our work off of it, but we also have to recognize that success looks like something we haven't seen before.
Beautiful. Yeah, and the argument I also heard about Vermont is, well, we don't have enough people. But then you look at places like Cuba, or I think Nicaragua has universal health care, if I'm wrong. They're a pretty small country. So it's not that's really not a numbers issue, my understanding. Especially
Yeah,
Washington State.
Definitely not in Washington. Single payer works best as like an economy of scale, right? So generally having more people is better. And Cuba is an example of where, because they are a fully public system, right? They're not doing it through what we would think of as like an insurance system. It's more through, having the clinics, and then that's one way they control the prices, right? They can keep the prices low because they run the clinics. So, I do think that like it's important to think of the overall healthcare system. What we're talking about with single payer tends to be the financing. What I tend to say, though, is that single payer is, at the end of the day, it is more efficient right? So it is not to say that it creates money or destroys money, right? It simply is for the dollars that go in, how much healthcare comes out, and single payer is more efficient. So the fact that we already pay more for our healthcare than everyone else means that there's enough money, right? Single payer basically only increases our operational budget by increasing efficiency. And so, I think that the point is that I believe that it always is going to save money, right? Uh, however much you're paying, if you make it more efficient, you will be able to deliver more care with the same amount of money, or the same amount of care with less money. Um, and uh, and you know, the first province to pass it in Canada was Saskatchewan, which is a rural county. It is a conservative province, um, and yet that was kind of where their healthcare revolution started. And I think that it could be a Saskatchewan of the United States. Could be North Dakota or Vermont or Maine. Um, there are states that have low populations where I think a movement could catch on and push it over. And you know, ultimately, I do think that this is why we need the federal government to do this. And I don't think our work is really done until we have this as a matter of federal policy and federally funded. Um, but uh, but you know, each state brings us closer, and each subsequent state makes it easier for the other ones, right? So we talk about this in Medicare for All everywhere, right? But Oregon could be the first state on the West Coast to have a universal healthcare system, right? And that might be something that is challenging for them to implement. There might be some questions about its long-term economic, viability. But if you can imagine, if Washington and California were to also pass universal healthcare systems, that this problem begins to shrink, right? Because things like, migration between the states is not creating as much of a healthcare disruption, right? Just the environmental healthcare increasing on the West Coast and things like that, right? Well, now you can even take it one step further, right? Let's say all three of them had passed their own statewide system, but they find a way to actually link those systems together, right? And so now they achieve a huge scale from, three very populous states with a lot of people and a lot of money in them, right? So now you have like a very robust single payer healthcare system on the West Coast. And then you could imagine that could almost be a big enough, robust enough system that you could expand it to cover the whole country. Just as one example of like how this could roll out, right? Ultimately, there's many different systems and pockets of public healthcare, right? So in the end, when it's universal, is it this one that was expanded, or that one that was expanded, or were they all connected into one system, right? I think that the distinctions are a little bit academic, but I think that basically any and all expansions to public healthcare are steps in the right direction. And you can see even down at the city and county level, you have Healthy San Francisco as one of the most interesting programs that shows how you can achieve something even sort of similar to this at the city level, right? And so Healthy San Francisco it's not a universal program. It is a safety net program in that it focuses exclusively on people with no insurance. But basically, it reimburses providers in San Francisco. It only serves the uninsured, or at least it only serves the uninsured for free. And it doesn't cover everything. Like, I don't believe it covers vision, but it does cover pretty generous set of basic healthcare needs. And so even at the local level, I believe that just opening a public hospital or a clinic, right? Or establishing a plan like Healthy San Francisco can be a meaningful move towards a statewide plan, which can be a meaningful move towards a federal plan, right? And ultimately, we could pass Medicare for all tomorrow, but it wouldn't mean that there was a hospital in every city. It wouldn't mean that everyone would be able to, right? So I think there's a lot, like Medicare for all is a really, really good sort of like rallying point, because it's like the point is we're going to make sure that everyone has the financial means to pay for their care. And then that is almost like you almost have to do that before you can even address all of the other needs, right? Because if people can't pay for the care, then you don't know where the demand is, right? So there's all of this medical need out there that we don't even know about because people aren't able to seek care. The moment we say, look, everyone gets care if they need it, right? Then suddenly we like, oh, these people all need ear doctors, right? I guess we need to like train more ear doctors. These people are 2 hours away from the nearest hospital. We need to build a hospital there, right? So there will be a lot more work to be done to like truly ensure that everyone, has free, uninhibited access to the healthcare system, right? And that they don't have barriers to getting the care that they need. But, it can be established statewide and it can be established federally. But just saying that this is not a commodity, right? This is a public good guaranteed by the government. That one gets people healthcare, and two, it changes our relationship to the healthcare system, and that's what we really need to happen.
Yeah, we're not. We just even on this call, we've talked a lot about the financial aspects and the structure, but there isn't a moral imperative too.
Absolutely, absolutely. The quote that I most often use is, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhuman," and that's a MLK quote. And I think MLK was a very, very sophisticated political thinker, much more so than a lot of people are aware of. And you see that when he talks about issues outside of what we could think of as, associated with the civil rights movement. So, um, in this case, right, he's talking about health, and he's focusing on the outcomes, right, and basically saying that you can look at the inequalities in just the health of people and see a massive injustice. um, and this is another one of those areas where it sets our moral imperative and the urgency around it, right? So I talk to legislators and people all the time who say, why don't you favor a more incremental approach? Don't you get worried about all of this change so quickly, right? And it's sort of like the first thing to recognize is that we're in the year 60 of a very, very drawn out incremental approach. Medicare was originally supposed to be look, Medicare, Medicaid, you cover the elderly, you cover the poor, and you expand them until they cover everybody. And that has not been really happening. There have been expansions to Medicaid, but then on top of that, right, when you're talking about healthcare, time is life, and some people say, oh, well, we don't have the time to do this, or we need to take more time to do that. And I would just remind people that like 45 to 60,000 people die every year, preventable deaths, because they could not access the healthcare they needed through our healthcare system, for financial reasons. And so for those people, it's not a year, it's not 2 years, it's the rest of the years that they had. And so, I know that we can't just snap our fingers and make this happen. Like, I understand that, right? But I think that the most important thing that we can do is decide that we are committed to this right now and get to work. And yeah, it might take 50 years, but that only makes it more necessary to start right now.
Yeah, wouldn't we want to use every dollar we possibly have in the best way to give everybody the best possible health care, as many people as possible, you know, and take care of as many people who aren't being taken care of, give them the best possible chance at good health. It seems a moral imperative for sure, and the idea that anybody would get wealthy or rich at the expense of what I just said seems immoral.
Yeah, and that, I think that's one of the major things that, I think needs to be changed. And you see, I think there's an old, I usually attribute this to Bernie Sanders, even though I don't have like a quote, and he probably is sort of more referencing somebody else. But the idea being along the lines of you can tell the values of a country by its healthcare system. Um, and I think that there's really something to that, right? Because a country's healthcare system is an answer to the question of what do we do to people when they are at their most vulnerable, right? And they are at the most mercy to the care of other people and the care of a system, right?
Mhm.
And in the United States, we are taught that almost nothing is inappropriate to leave in the hands of the market, which is to say, leave in the hands of wealthy individuals. And that, it would be much worse to create institutions and public systems and stuff like that. But I think that one of the things that we need to realize is that, like, this does not work for everything. People tend to recognize that when you press them, right? So do you want private police? Do you want private military? Um, you know, and so, I think that we need to help people understand that healthcare is one example of a part of society that is completely inappropriate to leave to the market. It does not work, for a start. And two, if it did work the way that market economics, you know, describes, it would actually still be incredibly cruel. So, you know, it basically, which is to say that if it is working, what they're saying is, well, it's reducing the overall costs by basically cutting the costs of people who can't really afford it, right? Um, so I think it's just we need to teach people other kinds of logic than just market logic, um, and basically recognizing that certain things are basic society, or like basic functions of a society and of a government, and that they tend to be the things that keep us alive and well. Um, and that, when it comes to things like safety and well-being, right? Things like police and military and stuff, um, the return on investment is not necessarily so good, and they tend to be about the things that you can't do, right? What are all the laws you can't break, right? What are all the things that you'll get thrown in jail for? And instead, we're trying to promote the idea of a government that's like, what are the things you can do? What are the things that you are given because you are a member of this, great society, right? So you can see the doctor, you can get the medical attention that you need, right? Those are things that I think will create a much better relationship to our government. I appreciate that my government gave me the ability to seek the life that I was trying to live, to receive the care that I needed. And I think that, it's, in addition to just the direct lives that are saved, I think that's another reason why I've really gravitated towards this issue, is because in the end, I think we do need people to believe that it is worth it to come together and build a society in which we do, live under certain social contracts, and we do things like pay taxes and take care of the sick, right? I think that we would all feel better and would be more prosperous in that society. But I think that people need to see it to believe it. And so I believe in creating that kind of public healthcare system so that people's lives will get better, and then they will understand it was worth it to organize. It was worth it to create this system, right? It was worth it to get rid of this predatory industry. The market logic was wrong, you know? And I think that that will make this, however long it takes, and I hope that we can get it done soon. But however long it takes, I think that will be its ultimate, the most profound part of its legacy will be the ways in which it changed how the American people thought and organized politically.
That's beautifully said. I agree with you. It's like, wouldn't it be nice to build a society that shows us our better nature? That we don't say, oh, we need to have a system that's based on our greed, like a profit motive. We actually have a system that's based on our care motive. That we actually build something because we care about each other, because we want to see, and we do. It's obvious. We humans care about each other. And can we build a system that reflects that? So where are we at? Where are you at now? Where's you said there's some initiatives. We're at the legislative right now. Your legislature's in system, at least in Washington State. There's a legislative is in session, is what I meant to say. Is there another effort at a ballot initiative at some point, or where are you at? Where's that whole Washington at, or where is it at nationally that you're seeing?
Well, we did reintroduce our bill to the Senate. We had the same sponsor that we've always had, which is Bob Hasagawa, who's been a really fantastic champion of our bill and of universal health care in Washington. We got called to a meeting in Olympia with the chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee, Senator Hasagawa, and then another group called Healthcare for All Washington, which played a pretty important role in the formation of that Universal Healthcare Commission. To talk about it, whole Washington has been, for the most part, I would say, on the outskirts of the legislature. And this, in many ways, was, I think, a first serious meeting with, the healthcare committee. And I think the meeting went quite well. When I said that I don't think we're getting anywhere in the Senate, that was largely impressed to me at this meeting, which is to say that Senator Cleveland did not think that our bill is ready for a hearing or to be implemented, and she directed us to the Universal Healthcare Commission. However, one of the things that came out of this meeting is that we will be recommending to the commission to look at our bill. And I think that coming from Healthcare for All Washington, whole Washington, Senator Hasagawa, who is the Democratic majority leader and the chair of the Healthcare Committee, I think that basically with that recommendation kind of co-signed by those people, they'll be almost forced to look at our bill. And my hope is that it's given a fair hearing, it's given a serious look, and either they support it or they give us, real reasons why they can't. And if they give us bad reasons, I think that's going to really, it's going to clarify where we are with them, right? Are we working together, or is this all, optics? So we are trying to move forward in good faith and with complete transparency, and to come ready to negotiate, but also, I think the most important thing is we have to keep, I think that we have to recognize that our policy is good, and that does not mean that it couldn't be improved, but it does not need to be watered down, right? Like, if it's changed, it needs to be for a good reason, and that reason can't be to make some special interest happy. So I think that's sort of the nature in which we need to be at the negotiating table. And ultimately, right, like, if they want to recommend something else, right, that's up to them. And if our insistence on not watering down our policy means that they recommend something that's 75% better than what they would have, right, then that's fine, right? Like, we believe that our participation moves the needle, whether it's directly by us or by kind of forcing other parties to be more like us. And so, in that sense, we're going to get whatever victories we can get. But that's all on the Senate side. I will say just shortly after this meeting, you can consider this a little sneak peek because I don't know what will come out of this meeting, but I will be meeting with Representative Daria Faravar from LD46, which happens to be my own district. So we can consider it a constituent meeting, but I have talked to Representative Faravar before. She was an endorser of Whole Washington before she won her campaign. And we have spoken about having her help us move this through the House. And I'm optimistic about the outcome of that meeting. But we don't have any promises or anything like that. And it's unfair to put pressure on her for something she hasn't actually committed to. So that is to say, I'm looking forward to the meeting and I'm optimistic about what will come out of it. But my hope is that we can get this introduced into the House, that we can ask for as many co-sponsors, and if everyone comes through for us, right? So we have endorsers, right? I really hope that our endorsers come through for us, and then sort of a second set of people who maybe haven't been asked or haven't heard about us, they see that and they go, I want to co-sponsor that, right? So that it grows our support. It's possible that some of our endorsers actually are unwilling to co-sponsor because sometimes they're a little bit, oh, well, I supported the initiative, but it's different in the legislature. So we'll see. I personally would find that quite disappointing. But for us, getting it introduced is a victory. And we are going to get as many co-sponsors as we can, and then we will try to get a hearing. And that's one great thing about having it, in the House and the Senate, is that we might be blocked on getting a hearing in the Senate, but that doesn't mean that we can't get one in the House. And so I think that if we can get our co-sponsors, or our endorsers to co-sponsor, which includes some members of the healthcare committee, we ought to be able to get a hearing in the House, and that would be a really big deal. So if I'm being totally real with you, I think best case scenario for the legislature this year, I might be bad at politics because I just go out and say exactly what I'm thinking and exactly what I think is likely to happen. But I think that, best case scenario is we get a hearing in both chambers this year. Worst case scenario is, it falls through the cracks and we don't quite get it introduced in the House because we just can't pin down a primary sponsor. We have a lot of people who have said they'll co-sponsor, but not primary sponsor. So that's the main challenge right now. But if we can get a primary sponsor, we will get co-sponsors, and that will just be a flat out victory for us. So that's the legislature. The commission, I think we're going to get the chance to present to, and then we will see if they give us any kind of response and how good of a response it is. But it will be an opportunity for us to leave a lot of public comment and to really get our people to show up in numbers and show them that we are watching very closely, that we know what we're talking about. And hopefully that's a good influence on the commission. We've encouraged people to apply to the commission. So I applied to be on the commission. I was not accepted. They did express that they would probably expand it again sometime soon. So there might be more vacancies. But I always tell people, you might not like, whatever the organization is, the body of power, positions of power and leadership, collect them and give them back to the movement, is the way that I look at them. Right. So, I have all sorts of reservations about the commission, but you're damn right. I want to be on it because I want to make sure that somebody there is making sure that single payer is represented. So yeah, more or less what I would say is we are going to continue to try to push and exercise power on all of these paths forward. I think that if there's a major adjustment that you might see, it's that we are kind of setting up to be a little bit more of a long haul organization, which is we've kind of thrown ourselves from campaign to campaign, trying to always get back out there, and it is exhausting, and it costs a lot of money, and it burns people out. And that is not to say that we won't run another campaign soon or anything like that, but I think what you might see is a little bit more deliberate messaging around it, right? So setting of expectations of like, we're collecting signatures, but we don't kill yourself because we might not be making it this year, that kind of thing. Or we've talked about things like running it as a pledge campaign, which doesn't allow us to get it on the ballot, but would allow us to collect signatures online, which means that we might be able to get it in front of like millions more people. And then, once we have, say, 2 million pledges, then we could try to take it to the ballot because we have all these people who've pledged to sign, and it's like we know who will sign. We just have to go find them and get the signature, right? So, we might break it down in that way where it's like we have sort of an off year where we run more of an infrastructure campaign, and then a campaign year where we really push out in public. So there's a lot of sort of infrastructure questions that we're answering right now. I just want to make it clear, like, whole Washington is not going anywhere. We are not giving up on the ballot. In fact, as I said, our volunteers still think that the ballot is the most likely place for this to happen, right? So the point is to be strategic and deliberate about the way that we're organizing. And our pact with the legislature and the commission remains always the same, which is that, of course, you are welcome to pass this. We would love it. We would love to get our weekends back. I believe it's your job, but it's also our job, right? The initiative process exists because we are citizen legislators. We're part of the system, right? And so failing to see satisfactory action from the legislature and from the commission, like, yes, we're taking it back to the ballot. I think that in the last year, we showed that we have a lot of strength as an organization. We have a lot of support out there. In order to get on the ballot, we need to grow. We need to be bigger. We need more money. We need more people. We need a bigger coalition, right? So we're going to be building all of those things. And the point is that I believe that the key ingredient is power. We'll be building our power. We'll be pushing that power on the commission. We'll be pushing it on the legislature. We'll be pushing it out there to gather signatures, right? But the point is, our power comes from being organized, being informed, having a plan, having infrastructure, right? And so the focus is the infrastructure, and you'll see us out there taking it for a test drive. If you don't see us out there doing something with it, it means we're doing something wrong. But it might be on the streets, it might be in a march, it might be going door to door with a petition sheet, it might be in town hall meetings and in Olympia, right? So, we have become, I think, one of our strengths as an organization has been, originally we were running, we were a ballot initiative organization, right? To run one ballot initiative. And now we're a nonprofit, and we've run a number of campaigns with a number of different strategies. And I think that it can be a little bit daunting to get involved with whole Washington, because you're like, wow, there is so much stuff going on, and like, who is who. But what I will say is that there really is, like, the door is open, so anyone can be involved, and you're really invited to pursue your ideas, right? And try to advance the issue in your own way. Like, we try to be a very sort of yes and organization. So we certainly have our own strategies that we're driving forward and trying to, like, invite you all to participate in. But yeah, it can be hard to keep track of everything. But if you jump in, we have meetings every Monday. We have a Slack. We're on Facebook. So, if you can get yourself in, we can try to help you, get oriented and figure out which way is up. But there really is something for everyone at Whole Washington, and it is difficult to describe how much this campaign can sweep you off your feet. It just, you asked me earlier more about my like transition from tech to activism, and I didn't say too much about it, but I worked in tech out of college, and I worked for a nonprofit called code.org, and I worked for Microsoft, and I worked on contract, and I worked full time. And so I spent a lot of time in that industry. And one of the things that kind of got me out of there was I, as a big picture, didn't feel that respected. And I did not feel like I was really ever asked to work on much of anything that was that important at all. Not to say I never did any good work. I liked code.org, so I wouldn't want to speak too ill of past employers. But, I came into the tech industry because I believed a lot of the propaganda around it about how technology was making people's lives better. It was making the world more democratic. It was empowering individuals. And I believed that, and I liked tech, and so it made sense to work in the tech industry. But my experience in the actual tech industry and seeing how it actually operates, it really got me thinking, like, if you were actually trying to do the best you could for the world, would it be, going back in to work on Bing tomorrow, or would it be working on something more like Whole Washington? And I just really realized that, like, um, you know, uh, it would be much better use of my time, and it would make a much bigger impact on the world for me to be doing this kind of work. And I think what's amazing about it is, like, everyone is there because they believe in this and because they're volunteering their time and attention to it. And so, um, you know, you might not expect how much more you feel valued at an organization like this, how much more free you feel to pursue your ideas. And, um, so, uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm getting weirdly philosophical about this or whatever, but I used to believe that, like, I might be a tech entrepreneur someday, and that was really what, like, motivated me in a lot of ways. And I would watch endless videos of, like, you know, Steve Jobs doing the old retreats for the next, like, during his next years, um, and stuff like that. And yeah, I didn't really ever expect that, like, I would sort of in some ways achieve that, but in the world of, like, healthcare and nonprofits. But, like, I've tried to really bring my sensibilities from the world of tech, but also, my political and ideological views, and say, what are the actual, like, implications of this in terms of how we organize and the kind of, like, movements that we create. And yeah, that's also partly because I have been frustrated with the way that the movement and some of these orgs and stuff operate, right? Which is to say, a lot of the times they come with the right values, right? Like, they have the right policy, they believe in equality and all of these things, democracy and stuff, but then the way that they actually operate is very top down. It's very, in many cases, kind of capitalist. I don't know. I don't have to get too red here, but, like, it's very much about, like, you raise money, you pay people, they do work, right? And I think out here on the extreme grassroots ends of things, you have a different kind of structure in which people rise into leadership because they have something to offer, and because they want to take that mantle. And it creates a very thrilling environment to work in, and it feels very good, and it brings you in touch with people that you know might have never met, but you form deep relationships with them. So I do, I just think it's so important to tell people this, because I think by and large people still often don't believe that they themselves could be activists, or they just don't see themselves as able to do it. And I think that it's just something you really have to experience to understand. And so I really do encourage you to whatever it is, whether it's attending that first march, going to that first meeting, RSVPing to that first webinar, take the first steps. And you do not know where you might find yourself. You just might find yourself running a statewide ballot initiative. It did happen to me.
That's excellent. Yeah, you could, if you're feeling hopeless or you're challenged, there's something hopeful about coming together and taking action, regardless of even the outcome. It's that the feeling of like, we're doing this, and it becomes more hopeful, and then I think that's what leads to all the ultimate results you're after.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. The doom scrolling, I mean, I remember thinking like, I could sit here and doom scroll all day, or I could actually harness that energy and do something useful, and maybe I'll feel better. And guess what? I did. I
Yeah.
felt a lot better. So, um, like real talk. I mean, I don't even think this might be the first time I've made this connection. I used to be like addicted to like podcasts and political, YouTube and stuff like that. And I won't say I've like completely stopped, but like it does not have that same hold over me. I consume that stuff in more of a like, this is sort of a passing interest, because ultimately, like I know that it's all fucked out there, but this is my, this is the little chunk of it that I've carved out, that I've chosen to focus my attention to, and it relieves me of a lot of those other anxieties and says, look, you can keep an eye on it or don't, but at the end of the day, your mission is the same.
Mhm. Yeah, so you're doing your piece. It's like you're doing the best you can in a space, and that gives you, I think it would, I imagine, give you some satisfaction and some peace, because we can't fix the whole world, and that's nobody's one job. But if each of us are doing our small part as best we can, that's kind of all you can hope for, I think, or that's all one would expect.
Yeah, for sure.
But if anyone wants to get involved, they just go to howashington.org, or you said there's a Monday meeting.
Yeah, so wholewashington.org, and wholewashington.org/volunteer, which should get you into our like mailing list, and then you'll get notifications about things like our meetings and how to get in our Slack. I will say that for any listeners who aren't in Washington, you don't have to be in Washington to participate in Whole Washington, although at times it can be challenging to know exactly what to do. But the whole point of Medicare for All Everywhere is that it's everywhere. So no matter where you're listening from, we absolutely could use you there. So you can go to medicareforalleverywhere.org, and we'd love to get you plugged into one of the teams. We've got one for every state, district, territory. And yeah, that's one where, it's truly, whether you want to work statewide, whether you want to work on federal, no matter where you are in the country, it's really designed to be that sort of mass organization that that unites all of those campaigns and all of those different kinds of energy. So, we would love to have you there as well. And you can sign up, and that also has like a Slack and a weekly meeting. But yeah, and then you can follow both of those on Twitter. It's at Whole Washington and at M4A_everywhere. And if you wanted to follow me, it's at Captain Stack.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming and talking to me about all this stuff, and talking to the people that listen about it. It's definitely something I have a passion for too. I'm hopeful for, and I'm hopeful for the work that you guys are doing. So, all right.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it so much, and I'm looking forward to hearing the episode.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, and yeah, I'll post it around. So, all right.
Right on.
Well, excellent. Let me just